age, like how old you are right now, thinking about that as just one big number up here on this platform. Got a big number up here that has the number of your age, and now add 5 years and come up with that next number. Now, I know some of you said, I don't want to play this game. I've got too big of a number up there, and I don't want to play this game. And a few others have said, well, in 5 years, I'm not sure that I'm going to be alive to play this game. So, well, you don't actually know that. I pointed out that Myra Exler is 103 years, almost 103 years old in our church last week. And at 108 years old, she could still be, I think she's going to be still the great evangelist that she is, God willing, and she's still with us here. But the premise is you in 5 years. We're thinking about what you in 5 years is going to be like, and there's two simple questions that are behind all of this. And who will we be in 5 years from now if we continue in our present course? That's the first question. Who will we be in 5 years from now if we continue in our present course? And the second question is, who do we want to be 5 years from now? And so, where is our momentum taking us? And do we like that destination of where we see our momentum taking us? Because now, if we don't like what we see in the future, what we think is going to be happening in the future, now is the time to get off the train that is taking us to that destination in that future. Who will you be in 2024? And who do you want to be by the time the next half decade is over? That is the topic of this whole series that we are in. It seemed like a good thing to start at the beginning of the year because it's really more than about the next 12 months, which are what New Year's resolutions are about. This is about the next 5 years, things that you can tackle in 5 years' time. Today we're going to look at in the Old Testament, two men in the Old Testament. Both of them are prophets. One of them is Elijah and the other is Elisha. Mostly this is going to be about Elisha, who would eventually become a prophet after Elijah, which is really something because Elijah is known as the mightiest of the miracle-working prophets ever. And I'm not sure if I were Elisha, I'd want the job after that guy who had that kind of a job description. The mightiest of miracle-working prophets ever, and I'm next up after him? I'm not so sure how that's going to go. Well, as it turns out, it needs to go a certain way so that Elisha has the same power and responsibility that Elijah does. And by the way, I don't know why God decided that the successor for Elijah was going to be Elisha. Somebody with such a similar name, I'm not sure why he couldn't just pick, Elijah, your successor is going to be Bob or Fred or somebody like that. But so it is. So let's begin with this passage. It has Elijah leaving a mountaintop where he has gone in hiding, basically, from some who are after him, leaving a mountaintop and going to seek Elisha to be a part of the prophetic team, the prophetic ministry. And so this is 1 Kings chapter 19. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He, referring to Elisha, was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." "Go back," Elijah replied. "What have I done to you?" Meaning basically that this is between you and God, Elisha. I'm not imposing this on you. It's between you and God. Do what you must do. So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. And then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. And I love the detail in the story because Elijah, when he was found, was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen. That's the phrase. It was 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he was on the 12th pair. And you might sort of pass right over that in this passage here because it doesn't resonate with us unless you grew up on a farm. It might resonate with you. But here, what we've just heard in this passage is that Elisha and his family were enormously wealthy. That business about 12 yoke of oxen, or plowing in this case with 24 oxen at a time, is the ancient equivalent of owning an expensive, tripped out John Deere tractor. Some of you do know what that's all about. John Davis, or a $500,000 fine. I looked him up to see $500,000. I actually worked on I worked on a potato farm. And it was enough to college. Never been so hot, and dirty, and smelly in all my life, but I drove the junk equipment through the fields, and next to me was the fine piece of equipment, the expensive piece of equipment. And there was a guy up in the cab there named Frank. Frank was an old sailor, and he cussed like a sailor, and he looked kind of, he had Popeye arms, forearms, and everything, and he would cuss me out left and right. But I look up there, and there's Frank adjusting, the air conditioner's blowing his hair, first off. He's adjusting the radio, and he has to wipe the sweat off the window to look down and see what I'm doing. So I know about $500,000, multi-million-dollar, six-figure pieces of equipment on the farms. And to have this many oxen at work at one time says that Elisha and his family were loaded. They were wealthy. And so then Elijah comes by and throws his coat around him. Some translations call this the mantle around him. This was this coat or a blanket, usually made out of animal skin with hair on it, or they used it like a coat, and they used it like a blanket. They used it like to hold things or to sit on at different times. But when a prophet had one, it was a way that he signified that you knew that this was a man of God. And it's a kind of an unusual scene, a weird scene, if you will, because Elisha, what is he doing? He's plowing his fields, right? He's working behind this yoke of the 12th yoke of oxen. He's plowing his field, and Elijah comes too. Elijah had been walking from this mountaintop. It had been several days that he had been walking to get to and to find Elisha. So Elijah is known by this point. He is known as the great miracle-working, mighty prophet of God. He is known. Elisha would have known about Elijah and all things and unusual things that had happened. This is where it really is helpful to go back and read through some of the stories in 1 Kings about some of these are just great stories to read. Stories like Elijah one time said that it is not going to rain at all. There will be no rain. We could have used him today in Dunedin. We could have used him today. No rain. There will be no rain until I say there will be no more rain. And sure enough, there is no rain until Elijah says there will now be rain. This is the same Elijah who took on 400 prophets of Baal, these other pagan god worshippers, took on 400 pagan gods of Baal and won. This is the same Elijah when he was on hiding out from the corrupt government leaders at the time. He was fed by birds. Literally, the ravens fed him ding-dongs or whatever they were feeding him at the time. They fed him the food that he was eating at the time. And so there's this great stories that take place in the Old Testament, and the great stories that take place about Elijah. And Elisha knows that Elijah is a rock star of the day. All of a sudden, Elijah shows up. And, I sort of envision him having, because I have him as a Harrison Ford type of character, Elijah, I sort of envision him have this crazy look in his eye because he has all this power and all these things that he's done. But he shows up, and he comes up along Elisha, and and he just throws this jacket over Elisha. And if I'm Elisha, I'm like, what just happened? I wasn't cold. Thanks for the jacket. What is this thing here? But for Elijah, it's a symbolic gesture that has just taken place. Elisha, who is plowing his field, has just been given a symbolic gesture by the great prophet Elijah. Elisha was to be a prophet like Elijah. It's like Elijah just handed Elisha a lightsaber and said that you are now going to go to Dagobah system, you Star Wars fans out there. I had to do that because last week I spoke about Klingons for Star Trek fans. But this was Elisha's chance to be under the authority of Elijah. And under the authority of Elijah, he said, you can follow me, you can learn from me, you can learn to use the lightsaber, you can learn what it means to wear the mantle, this cloak, this jacket that I wear as a prophet. And Elisha knew the significance of it, and he grasped that immediately, and he walked away from the wealth of his family. And he walked away from the security of following a guy who has done some pretty crazy things in his ministry. Some of the things I was just talking about. Elisha knew that he was embracing a life where God was going to use him dramatically, but it would also be a lot of uncertainty. There would be a lot of hardship, difficulty, opposition, not knowing what's going to happen day in and day out. And we hear that he accepted the job on the spot. Elijah responds and wants to make sure that Elisha understands what he's getting into here. And Elisha understands what he's getting into here. He just wants time to go say his goodbyes to his family. And then what do we see him doing? He signifies that he is all in following Elijah. He is all in by killing the oxen and by burning the equipment, the plowing equipment. It is a burn the ships kind of a moment. It is a there is no turning back kind of a moment. And then he follows Elijah. And that is the story. Just like that, he follows Elijah. And what does he do in following Elijah? The text says that he became Elijah's servant. You have to wonder about that. And there's a lot of silence here about what exactly Elisha was doing as the servant of Elijah. And in fact, years go by. Literally years upon years upon years go by. And in all of that time, we are only given one detail about what it was like, what the job description was of Elisha as he served as a servant of Elijah. And that one job description, you ready for it? It's in 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 11. It comes a little bit later on, and it comes when someone asked about Elijah, we get his job description when he was working for Elijah. An officer of the king of Israel answered, Elisha, son of Shaphat, is here. He, here it is, used to pour water on the hands of Elijah. There it is. That was his job. That is all that we are told. He used to pour water on the hands of Elijah. For years, he poured water on the hands of Elijah. It's a ceremonial cleansing that we're talking about. For years, he was the guy that handed out the hand sanitizer to the prophet Elijah. At least that's all that we are told about. Because what we know is that he is in training. What we know is that he has been selected. That God has selected Elisha to be the prophet of God in the order of Elijah. And so finally the details start to flow about what exactly is going on. About at the end of Elijah's life, we hear more details as Elijah's life was nearing his conclusion. God told Elijah in advance that his days were up. That he was about to go to heaven. You're about to be done here on earth. He told Elijah that. He told Elisha that as well. And it's all coming to its conclusion. They begin walking to this solitary place, and they come where Elijah was going to be taken up to heaven. And they come to the Jordan River, and they have to cross this river. And they're standing there, Elijah and Elisha. Behind them is this group of their students, these other prophets in training, the 50 of them back behind him, and there's Elisha at the water's edge, and Elijah takes that same cloak that he put onto Elisha. He got it back. He's not ready for it yet for the transfer. He rolls it up, and he smacks the edge of the water with it. And when he smacks the edge of the water with it, water goes to the left, water goes to the right, the ground in between is suddenly dry, and Elijah and Elisha walk across the river to the other side. You can't make this stuff up. This is all in the Bible. You can read this for yourself. These are fascinating stories. People say the Bible is boring. So now you must not be reading the same Bible I'm reading. There's some great stories in the Bible. You need to read these stories. He hits the river with his coat, and just like Moses, walk through to the other side. Here's actually the story. 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 6 through 12. Then Elijah said to Elisha, stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan. And Elisha replies, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you. So the two of them walk on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me what I can do for you before I am taken from you. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet, if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." And then listen to what happens. This is the action of what happens. And if you've ever heard that phrase, chariots of fire, if you ever watched that movie, Chariots of Fire, and you wonder where that phrase comes into our language at all, it is from this very moment. As they were walking along, Elijah and Elisha are walking along. As they are walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this, and he cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. And then he took hold of his own garment, and he tore it in two, a sign in that day of great emotion. See, I hear people say from time to time, and I think this myself from time to time, if we could choose the manner of our own death, I hear people say, "I would just like to lay my head down on my pillow and go in my sleep. And when I wake up, I'm in my Father's arms, I'm in heaven." I have just put out before you a whole new world of possibilities for how it could go. You could just say, "God, that would be really cool too, God. That would be really great. Can I see the chariot of fire and the horseman of fire come down and be taken up in a whirlwind like Elijah was taken up?" It is a dramatic scene, is it not? It is a dramatic scene. And here's what happens right afterward. Right after that moment takes place, Elisha takes up that same mantle, the same one that was put on his shoulder. Elijah carried it for himself, smacks the water with it. Elisha takes that same mantle that had fallen from Elijah, and he goes back to the River Jordan, and he hit the water himself, struck that water, and the water did the same thing. It divided this way and that, just like it did with Elijah, and Elisha crossed over, where all of those other 50 people were watching him. And you could just imagine being in the crowd with those 50 people watching what you just watched and seeing Elisha make that walk right back across that river, and you would have been floored by that and say, "That man, Elisha, has now the power that God had given to Elijah." You would have said, "He is the man." I want to talk about three movements in this story that will help us, because again, we're in this larger series. It's thinking about the years ahead and where we want to be 60 months from now, where we want to be in the year 2024. Three movements in this story that will help us in the years ahead. The message title today is called "In the Absence of a Crisis." And why is that? Because if you think about it, and you know this to be true already in your life, because every one of us in this room has experienced a crisis in our lives. If you think about it, a crisis is an event that proves that we are all capable of change. Right? Have you not changed as a result of the crises that have come into your life? And in fact, many of the positive changes that have come into my life, I suspect that many of the positive changes that have come into your life. Lisa Goodrich here was telling me a story just before the service began about a positive change that came into her life that came through a crisis time in her life when her mom died. And these amazing things happened in her life as a result of, through that time of crisis. You already know this is true, and yet I still hear people say things like, "I could never change." Like whatever it is about them that they might want to change, they think to themselves, "I see other people living that way, but I could never do that. I just cannot change. I could never, ever do that." Well, you would if you had to. That's why we read those stories. You know those stories where you read the story about a mom who picks up a car? Why did she pick up a car? Because her baby was trapped. Her son was trapped underneath that car. She had to pick up that car. She had strength that she had no idea about. You would if you had to. If someone had a gun to your head and said, "Do it or I'll pull the trigger," you would do. The point is we have strength and abilities that we don't even realize that we have. So if you had to, what could you do? If you absolutely had to, what could you do? The answer is, for most people, more than you think. When you have to, you are capable of change. But how do we change in the absence of a crisis? That's really the question, because I don't want any of us, myself included, to have to go through those kind of transformation as a result of getting hurt, getting stuck under a car, being uncomfortable, having some hardship in life, facing these various types of crises in life. But if a crisis is good for generating change, there has to be some way on the inside of us to generate the energy that is needed to get us through to that better place, similar to having an internal crisis. Otherwise, if we don't have that sort of thing, that thing inside of us, otherwise we will dig in and we will not change, and we will keep on doing the same thing, and we will keep on getting the same results. We will get 5 years down the road and nothing will be different. It happens all the time. Some people, you might be one today, you say, it feels like I'm in a rut. That's what I'm talking about. It happens all the time. So 3 things to talk about here. 3 movements here. First, it is highly likely to take drastic action to get you to where you want to be. It's highly likely that we need to take some drastic action to get us where we want to be. And Elisha demonstrates this, does he not? Elisha demonstrates drastic action when he chooses to burn the plowing. The call of Elijah is upon him. The call of God through Elijah is on him. Elisha hears it, and he takes this dramatic action when he chooses to burn the plowing equipment and then have a barbecue with all of his friends, with the animals that were plowing the fields shortly beforehand. That is a drastic step. That is resolve. That is determination. And that is the choice to say, we will die or we will succeed, but there will be no retreat. Are you drastic in the action that you are taking? Am I? Are you soft? Are you easy with your desire to bring about a change for a better tomorrow? Where are you with that? Drastic action is necessary at the beginning. Now, at the start of the you in 5 years, because something has got to give. Something has got to light the fuse that's going to get everything started. It's going to take a spark to get that fire going, and without that spark, there is no fire. No matter how much kindling wood you build up, without the spark, there is no fire. It's not going to happen until that first spark of decision, or that line is crossed over. Some of you know this all too well. You have a technical background and a science background. You know that Isaac Newton's first law of motion, what is described as inertia, goes like this. Objects will remain at rest, or objects will remain in uniform motion in a straight line, unless compelled to change its state by the action of an external force. That is what we're talking about. That kind of dramatic external force action is what we're talking about. Otherwise, everything stays the same. Here's where it gets real. It is drastic. It is dramatic to grab the food that you know that you don't need to be eating and throw that food into the trash because it is not doing you any good. That is a drastic action to take. Some of you might need to take it and throw it out into the trash bin. Some of you might need to burn it to make sure that it doesn't come into your house again. That is drastic. It is drastic to delete some numbers from your phone because those particular people are toxic in your life. It is drastic to break up with someone who is no good for you. And God has got something better for you, and God himself will be your reward. It is drastic to say, here is the line. Here is the line that which will not be crossed no more past this line. It is drastic to say that the time for half measures is over. Otherwise, 5 years from now, you are an older and an exaggerated version of who you are right now, but that is it. Drastic action will start you into a different future. That's the first thing we see, the first movement out of this passage here today. The second thing is in Elisha's story himself. There is this steady progression with Elisha. There's a steady progression, and it will take a slow and a steady progression to get where we want to be. For years, what was Elisha doing? That one detail that we had about his life as serving Elijah was that he was pouring water. What did he do? He poured water. What did he do? He poured water on the hands of Elisha. He poured water. Day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out. He poured water on the hands. And if we're going to we have this drastic action to get some new things in motion. After that, what's going to be needed is consistency. And that is a burden for many people, having consistency in their life. It just doesn't look like when you have this day in and day out type of thing, it doesn't look like much is happening at all, and yet things are happening. You just keep pouring water and pouring water and pouring water. The Greek philosopher Epictetus said this. He said, "No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me that you desire a fig, I answer you there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen." So you want things to go into the ground. You want to give them that time that they need, the consistency that they need to grow from the ground. Or you want that compound interest to take hold, and so you stay with it, steady in, steady on in your life. You want the processes that God put in of slow and steady to win the race for you. God always works in sowing and in reaping, in seasons, in summer and in winter, and that we are found a year from now doing the thing that we were meant to do and thinking of what could happen even a year from now, another 5 years out from then, and what could happen even 60 years beyond our own lifetimes. We're thinking about these things day in, day out. As one man put it, there is no magic bullet. People look for magic bullets. There is no magic bullet. There is no secret ingredient. You don't make $200,000 a year spending 2 hours a day on the internet. You don't lose 30 pounds in 1 week. You don't rub 20 years off your face with cream. You don't fix your love life with a pill or find lasting success with any other scheme that is too good to be true. It'd be great if you could buy your success, fame, self-esteem, good relationships, and health and well-being in a nice package from Walmart, but it doesn't work that way. What it takes is day in, day out, steady, consistent working at it, pouring the water on the hands day in and day out. And spiritual growth is no different. If we want to be in a different place spiritually, a deeper place, closer to God spiritually in the years ahead, it means that day in and day out that we're finding ourselves in small groups where we can talk this out, where we are finding ourselves talking to God about the various life decisions and not leaving God out of the life decisions. Or we are reading our Bibles and studying our Bibles, or we are spending time in worship with others like we are right now. Or we are time in prayer, serving eagerly and giving generously. John Maxwell put it this way. He said, improvement doesn't happen in a day, but it must be daily. It's not going to happen in a day. You cannot be changed by tomorrow, but it has to happen daily if we're going to get to where we want to be. So dramatic action followed by steady, progressive behavior. And then a third movement. There has been, after that drastic action and after that steady progression, you can then enjoy momentum. And that is where it gets fun. That's where it all begins to come together. Isn't it interesting that for Elisha, who had that drastic action that he took, leaving everything behind, and killing the oxen, and following Elijah. Isn't it interesting that eventually he comes to this place where after that drastic action, and after that slow and steady, day in and day out behavior, he comes to this place of dramatic, really momentum in his own way, in his own life. Because suddenly that company of prophets who were there in that scene where the chariots of fire took Elijah up, suddenly that company of prophets saw Elisha with this power in him that God had been given to him. They saw Elisha with the power of God working through him. That is where everything begins to pay off for him over the time that he had spent. Drastic action followed by slow and steady progressions leads to momentum. And why is that? Well, if you could talk about it in terms of Newtonian physics, it goes back to that first law of motion again. There are actually two parts of that. One is that an object that is at rest will stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. But there was another part of it as well. Objects that are in motion will stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. Inertia is that double-edged sword. So course correction, followed by daily decision-making, eventually leads you to a spectacular thing called inertia that is working for you. It's like the space shuttle. I looked at one time. At one time, it was like 18,000 pounds of pressure, of force that was required just to break the gravitational pull of Earth and get the space shuttle into orbit. I know that the reason why all those fuel pods are there is that the bulk of the fuel that is needed for the space shuttle is on for takeoff. That's it, for takeoff. Once you're in motion, once you're in space, they could set that thing in motion and it would never stop unless it ran into a planet or a star or an asteroid or something like that. Never stop. Because the object that was at rest found itself in motion, and once it's in motion, it will keep going, and it is true for you and for me as well. That's why people say that it's so hard to get started with something. It's so hard to get started with the good eating habits. It's so hard to get started with the good exercise or fitness habits. It's hard to get started. Once you're in motion, it's not that hard. It is not that hard. Not only can you change, and not only can you have the life that you want in 5 years, but eventually you can come to this place where all that change and all that energy that you put in initially, it'll keep going. It'll take on a life of itself. It'll keep on moving in the same direction. It's hard to get started, and it will require some energy. But once you have that, you'll get to this phase where you and I have momentum with all the right things that we want momentum for. So, to get to something special in 5 years, we're in this series for a little while. We're talking about this for a little while, for a few weeks here. But it really begins as we make the decision now. And we want to move into that way then. So, now, take the bold step. Take some bold action. I had somebody after the first service this morning said, you know what, I can't believe I came into church today. And that's what I heard in church today. Because I have been thinking about, and he told me this whole story of everything he'd been thinking about. And he said, now I know what I need to do. I need to take a step. I need to take that first step, that dramatic step. And it was just like this real thing that crystallized for him, that God pressed upon his heart. Take that bold and drastic action, whatever that may mean for you. And then settle into a slow and steady progression. And you will eventually enjoy the momentum that will come. And ultimately what that will mean, as you and I are all doing that as a people, ultimately what that will mean is that you and I will become this unstoppable force for good in this world, operating and serving in Jesus' name. It starts today. Prayer partners, if you would, make your way to the back there, and I will say to any and all that if there's something that you are in need of prayer for this day, anytime between now and the rest of this service, go back and to receive prayer this very day.